What's up, and welcome to the Nothing But Net Worth podcast, where we have interviews with prominent coaches, athletic directors, and NIL athletes discussing critical topics around financial literacy, entrepreneurship, and much, much more. My name is Hassan Thomas, former student athlete and current promoter of all things financial wellness. And today, we have record-breaking West Virginia quarterback, former quarterback for the Houston Oilers, former NFL executive, and the new executive director of the ASUN WAC Conference, Mr. Oliver Luck. How are you? How are you?
I'm doing well, Hassan. Nice for you to have me on, so I appreciate it, man.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, man. We're going to have a great time. I really appreciate my Uncle David for connecting us. We're going to have a great conversation about your experience and then talk about a little bit about NIL. But before we jump into that, how we normally like to start off our shows with a segment called the Financial Coin Toss. I'm going to ask you a few either or questions just to see where your head's at, all right?
You bet.
All right. So in your opinion, for the college athletes that are in college right now, they're getting the NIL, they're getting this money. What's more important, would you say? How much money they can make in NIL or how much money they can keep from NIL?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question, and that illustrates a great point. There's a big difference between gross and net.
Mm-hmm.
And every businessman knows that, right? And we all know that we're working because your net is basically your salary or your earnings after taxes. So
Uh-huh.
if you're a college athlete and you're doing NIL deals, that's great. I would say, make sure that at the end of the day, you understand, okay, I've got to give something to Uncle Sam. An employee, you're not a W-2 employee. You're a independent contractor as a college athlete. So
Yeah.
you might get a check for $1,000 from a, restaurant that has you sign autographs every Saturday afternoon for a couple of hours. But, if you
Mm-hmm.
do that enough and your income rises to, whatever the cutoff is nowadays, you're going to have to pay some taxes on that. So you want to make
Yeah.
sure that your net is healthy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's okay to spend a little bit of money on making money, right? Creating the opportunities. You can
For
write
sure.
off, your travel costs and whatever. I mean, you have to think of yourself as a business person, right? You are your own little
100%.
business. So Hassan Thomas, you're making NIL deals. You might as well be Hassan Thomas LLC, and
Yep.
you have to kind of
Honestly,
view it that way. That's
the
a
CEO of
big
your own
shift.
brand.
That's a big shift because in my era in college, my son's era, Andrew graduated in 2012 from Stanford. They couldn't
Mm-hmm.
do NIL deals, right? They didn't exist, so they didn't have
Yeah.
to worry about it. And they all of a sudden, if you get to the to the big leagues, then it's a different story. But it's hard as an 18-year-old,
Mm-hmm.
19-year-old, freshman year in college. All of a sudden, you got some NIL opportunities. I would say absolutely take advantage of them, but also
Yeah.
realize that you might have to spend a little money to go hire an accountant or a
Mm-hmm.
tax advisor, and that's okay.
Yeah.
If you're making 10 grand, you can go spend $500 on an accountant to say, just making sure I'm not, I'm cool with Uncle Sam and the IRS and your state,
Yeah.
and sometimes even city,
That'll save
tax
you a lot of money
authorities.
on the back end.
That's
A
right.
lot of time and money. A
That's
lot
right.
of stress.
That's right. Don't be, penny wise and pound foolish, I guess is what one thing I would say.
I like that. I like that. So before we dive too deep into the NIL and this new space that we're in, I want to go back to your story because I believe for every athlete, for every entrepreneur, there's a certain moment, a turning point where they realize that we can make it to the next level. For you, that was being the star quarterback at West Virginia. So take it back to your high school years. When did that dream become real that you could then go play at West Virginia and break all the records that you did? Take it back to high school for us.
Well, I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio, and went to high school in Cleveland, and played football, played basketball. Typical kid back in that era. I had
Uh-huh.
no clue in high school that I would have been good enough to play in the NFL. I mean, I'll be
Really?
very honest. That I graduated high school in 1978. There were no recruiting services. There was no huddle where you could send film out to a
Yeah.
thousand colleges. College coaches recruited, but they basically recruited by calling up the high school coach and saying, "Hey, you got any good players this year?" Anybody that is capable of playing Division I college? If so, let me know and I'll come by and talk to them. Right? They relied on each other. It's a big network.
Gotcha.
And as a 14, 15, 16-year-old, 17-year-old in high school, you're not part of that network. You don't really see it. There's no online, there's just all that stuff that we take for granted now didn't happen back then. I mean, it didn't happen in the
Gotcha.
80s or the 90s either, really. Maybe in the 90s, some of the stuff started to get pretty. So I never had any idea that I had the skill set to
So
go to
was
the
it like
NFL.
junior year, senior year? Like
Well,
when did
all
it?
I wanted to do was have a good college career. I thought, okay,
Uh-huh.
I'm going to college. I'm going to go spend my 4 years. Do the academic part. I'm going to have fun, and I'm going to play football. I'm going to take it very seriously, and I'm going to try to be a starter as soon as I could. My freshman year, I was
Yeah.
a backup quarterback. I broke my collarbone against Penn State, and I was out right for the second half of the season. And I committed to myself in my first spring practice that freshman year in spring. I said, I'm going to beat out the starter. That son of a
Yeah.
gun. I didn't say it that way. I said it a little bit rougher. I said, son of a gun, I'm going to beat him out, right? And I did.
Yeah.
I got to start for 3 years. But even as a starter at major college, and I was, we played against Pitt and Dan Marino and Penn State and Todd Blackledge. I mean, these are all guys who went on like I did to the NFL.
For
But
sure.
I really didn't have a sense of my ability to go to the NFL until my senior year of college. And that's
And
when
what
the NFL
changed?
scouts started to come look around and,
Mm-hmm.
watch film. Or the coach would say, hey, be sharp at practice today because there's a coach from the Jets or the scout from the Steelers or whatever who's going to be
Gotcha.
watching. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
and I don't think there weren't that many guys who, at least in that era, I don't think there weren't that many guys who came in as freshmen who said, "Man, I'm going to the league." You know what I mean? I'm headed straight to the league. Right? Yeah, there
Yeah.
was no. You couldn't get out early. There was no junior year. You had to play 4 years basically to graduate and get out.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a different era. But
Gotcha.
from in my case, I didn't realize I could play professional football or would be good enough to hang around and make a little bit of money until my senior year of
Mm-hmm.
college.
Okay, so it was your senior year of college. That's when the scouts started to come. That's when the buzz was really like, okay, this guy Oliver is the truth, and he can make it. So then you got drafted by the Oilers, played 5 years, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So during that time, what was your experience? Because I heard you mention earlier when you talked that you actually were going to law school during your time playing.
Yeah. So,
Talk about that. That's crazy.
well, so I get drafted. I come down to Houston and I played my rookie season was 1982. NFL historians will know that 1982 was the year that the NFL went on strike. We played our opening game and then we went on strike for, I think, 8 weeks or something like that, a couple of months. So I
Okay.
played one NFL game and then, I was out of work for 2 months, basically. And I
Hmm.
remember saying to myself, you can't count on this league very long. I mean, I got to know my teammates. I was a backup quarterback at that point. I played behind Archie Manning, and then I ended up being a backup to Warren Moon, who came down and both great players. Warren, of course, a Hall of Famer. And
Hmm.
I remember saying to myself, I got to start day one of my NFL career preparing for day one of the end of my NFL career, right
Wow.
after my
Really?
NFL career is over. Yeah, it's a rough
Hmm.
business. And when
Uh-huh.
you come in as a rookie and you have a veteran say to you, "Hey, young guy, you're gonna, welcome to the team." You know what the average length of a career is? Like three and a
Hmm.
half years, right?
Yeah.
And so I played longer than the average. Many of my friends played longer than the average. But you know what? If there's a guy who plays longer than the average,
Mm.
there's a couple guys who played less than the average, right? Who made
For
it through
sure.
a year or two. So it
Mm.
is it's a physically tough business. I've never done anything as hard as go through an NFL game. It's physically
Hmm.
you get beat up, and you have to take that into consideration as
Hmm.
as you think about life going forward. And you're young. We all as young men we think we're
Invincible.
unbeatable,
He-Man. Yeah.
invincible. There we go. Great word. So I started thinking, day
Uh,
one, what am I going to do to prepare myself while I'm an NFL player for the next phase of my life? So I went to
wow.
law school. I went to law school. I took classes during the season at the South Texas College of Law, which is a really good law school in Houston. And then in
Okay.
the off season, January, February, March, April, May, and we didn't have all these mini camps and stuff. We had a long off. I went up to Austin, University of Texas Law School,
Yeah.
and that's where my degree is from. And that gave me a whole different outlook on what I was doing as a player,
Yeah.
what I was doing as a citizen, and sort of planning out my future, because it gives you a whole bunch of options.
Got.
I mean,
My dad has always said the best option is to have options.
no, your dad's right, man.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And we talked a little bit earlier about the student athletes being the CEO of their own brands. They're really student athlete entrepreneurs now. So, would you recommend a student athlete now building a personal brand, starting a business while in school? What's your thoughts on that? Because it's a new time now.
Yeah, I mean, it's a completely new era for college athletes. I would say a couple of things. One, don't de-emphasize the student piece, because you still want to get an education. You still want to walk away with a degree, because you got 40
100%.
years to work, 50 years to work. So
Mm-hmm.
that's going to be important. Number two, I think the first thing is to wrap your head around the idea that, yes, you are your brand. You are
Yeah.
an independent contractor, and an independent contractor. I'm an independent contractor the way I work, and I have schools or professional teams hire me, right? And they hire
Mm-hmm.
me because of my reputation, because of my background, because of the knowledge I have,
The
whatever.
value
So
that you've
you
built
all you
over the
always want to
years.
say to
Mm-hmm.
yourself, okay, I'm an independent contractor. I'm only 18 years old. I don't have a whole lot of experience, but why is that person wanting to hire? Why is that company wanting to hire me? So you got to keep that in mind. That have to work in your brand. You know what I mean? You got to do things that others find attractive, right?
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Understand your value proposition, huh?
no, it is, right? And yes, they might see you and say, "Oh, that's Hassan. Yeah, he's a football player. I don't really know the guy, but he's a football player at local, state U. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what his value proposition is to me. But you can be so much more. You can say, listen,
Got you.
I can speak in front of a crowd. I'm very comfortable addressing. I love working with kids. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I can speak French. You know what I mean? I mean, something
Yeah.
that's completely different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because hey, you probably don't know this about me, but my mother, was French, or
Mm-hmm.
grew up in Martinique or something, and married
That's
my dad
actually a
in the
huge
U.S.
point.
All
Making
those
sure
things,
that
yeah, all those things that are unique,
don't let them
package
box
those.
you in, basically,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
just an athlete. I like
package
that.
those so that other people know that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because then all of a sudden your attractiveness as an independent contractor, as a business person, is
Mm-hmm.
is that much higher. That opens up more opportunities.
Kind of
So
like Flage from LSU, who does the music as well. I
yeah,
don't know if who've
no,
seen her.
she's a great rapper. And I'm
Yes.
the last person to like be able to say that's quality rap or not. Because it's
Yeah.
not my genre. But yeah, I've read about her. She's very talented, and that's opened
Yeah.
up a whole new universe for her, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the thing about it is, I, I I'm a big believer that particularly student athletes, college players, doesn't matter what sport, you've got a
Yeah.
lot on your plate, and you've got academics, you've got athletics. You also want to have some fun in college, right? You don't necessarily, hey, what are you doing this Saturday night? And you got to say, well, I've got to make an appearance at the Rotary Club or something because I'm getting $500 when your
Yeah.
buddies are all going out having fun, right? Because spring practice is over, and now it's time to relax a little bit. So you want to
Mm-hmm.
keep it all in balance.
Gotcha.
And I would say take advantage of NIL opportunities. But if you think the time that you need to do that is going to cut into your academics or into your athletics, dial it back a little bit, right? Make sure that
Makes sense.
you can do all those things at some level of balance,
Mm-hmm.
because that's important. You don't, money's good, and you need to put money in your pocket. I get it, and you want to send money home and all that. Take your
Mm-hmm.
boyfriend, girlfriend out for dinner, but don't do it to the detriment of either your academics or your athletics.
Sacrifice the other two. That makes sense. That makes sense. So what would you say is like your overall thoughts on NIL? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Is it helping the NCAA? What's your thoughts on that?
So I think it's a good thing. Listen, I
Okay.
think that young people, all sports, who are able to take advantage of NIL opportunities, I think it's good. That it's putting money in their pocket. It's a serious transfer of wealth, from companies or individuals to student athletes.
Yeah.
The revenue sports are leading the way. Obviously, football, men's and women's basketball, but
Mm-hmm.
there's gymnasts that are doing very well. I understand there's hockey players in some of the schools where ice hockey is like a big thing. Like
For sure.
Quinnipiac or Union.
Mm-hmm.
There's some places there where some ice hockey players are making some. So I think it's a good thing as long as it's, as I had mentioned, as long as it's sort of in balance with other things in life.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
listen, you learn a lot about yourself when you have to go. Let's say you've got to spend, an hour and a half with a bunch of kids, because you're running a sports camp. But guess
mm-hmm.
what? You've got to organize that camp. You got to find a place to do it. You got to
Yep.
go, buy bottles of Gatorade. Man, you all of a sudden you are a business person.
Mm-hmm.
And
Promote
that,
it
but
on
it's
marketing, on social
that's right.
media, and
You got to find those deals. You got to go out and book them. You got to make sure they
mm-hmm.
pay you. Then you got to make sure that you got an accountant that's looking at it and says, well, you might owe $1,000 in taxes or whatever. So
Yeah.
that's all time consuming. And
Mm-hmm.
listen, there's plenty of time for making money in the rest of your life. So do NIL by all means, but you don't want to look back in your college career and say, damn, I didn't have a whole lot of fun because I was always doing NIL
That's
deals.
money
Yeah, I
hungry. Yeah.
put a little money in my pocket, but I missed out on all those fun times that you
That
have
you
with
can't go
your
back to.
people. No, you can't.
Because you look weird as a 30-year-old still in the club, still try to party with the
No,
college
that's right. I
students.
mean, there's a time and a place for everything. And
Yeah.
one of the, at least my opinion, one of the great things about playing college and playing sports at college is you have immediate friends. Like I showed
Mm-hmm.
up my first day at campus in Morgantown, West Virginia, and I had, whatever, 100 friends. Everybody in the football
Literally.
team is your friend, right? And then all
Mm-hmm.
of a sudden, man, this is fun. I'm having a good time. I'm working hard. I'm busting my tail, blah, 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 but
Yep.
I'm having fun. I'm getting to meet a bunch of different people, getting to
Mm-hmm.
take a weekend trip somewhere. We, jump in a car and drive up to, New York City or whatever, have fun, or Washington, D.C., because a couple guys live there, And you
Yeah.
can't do that if you've got, oh, I can't go, man. On Sunday, I booked an NIL thing at the local, whatever, bookstore to sign autographs for an hour and a half. And then you
Mm-hmm.
can't stiff the bookstore because you made that commitment. Because
For
if you
sure.
stiff them and don't show up, that's bad for your brand, right?
Yep.
So,
And that's gonna get
it's,
around.
you got to be, a little bit careful and don't get greedy, I guess would be the other thing I would say.
Mm-hmm. 100%. 100%. And jumping back to this, and I have a couple more questions for you, Mr. Oliver. I want to know, in your opinion, where do you see NIL going in the next 5 to 10 years?
So, it's been very interesting. It started July 1 of 2021 when the NCAA sort of wiped all those rules off their books.
Yeah.
And what quickly happened was, these collectives started to show up. So it's really booster clubs, if you will. So,
Mm-hmm.
and they were independent of the athletic programs, but they were supporting the student athletes with NIL opportunities and NIL
Uh-huh.
money. So it seems to me that at least at the top, of big time college football and let's say basketball, men's and women's basketball,
Mm-hmm.
but at least at the big, the top 60, 70 schools, they're going to ultimately get into a revenue sharing agreement with their players, with their student athletes. You know,
Gotcha.
Nobody would take a whiteboard and say, hey, we would like to come up with a system that student athletes can start to put a little bit of money in their pocket, right? For years and years and years, decades and decades, they couldn't do anything, earn any money. But we think the time has come to change. So let's take a chalkboard and we'll map out a system, and it's
Uh-huh.
going to have collectives, all these weird things. You'd never designed it that way. I
Uh-huh.
mean, you just wouldn't do it. It's crazy how it developed because there was no regulation, no marketplace,
For
to
sure.
speak of. So it just organically grew like mold or a mushroom or something.
Uh-huh.
So I think ultimately institutions are going to take it in house. They're going to provide benefits to players. It's going to be above board. Everybody will know what Hassan Thomas is making or what Oliver Luck is making or whatever. And
Yeah.
they'll make decision in high school. They'll decide, oh, I'm a good basketball player. I can go to Creighton and I can make 10 grand. I can go to Kentucky and I can make 100 grand. Boy, if Kentucky has a place for me, I'd like to go. And they don't. I'm going to Creighton. I mean, I think it's going to be much more transparent. And I
Gotcha.
think it's going to be more of a partnership, if you will, between the student athlete, the player, and the institution. Now, I say that, but that may only apply to the top 70, 80 schools. I mean,
Gotcha.
there's a whole bunch of schools in Division One, that don't have a whole lot of money, that don't even play football, right? There's a whole bunch of schools in Division Two and Three that don't have any money, to share
Yeah.
with their student athletes. And so, Division Two, Division Three, lower level, Division One, it's not going to look much different than it looks now. I think all the change is going to be really, those top,
At the
whatever,
top.
50, 60, 70 schools, and it'll be more of a partnership, and the players will get paid. And I hope they continue to be students and take advantage of the educational opportunities that exist, because
For
that's
sure.
critical. But it'll look differently. But again, only at the very top. But that's what the public sees.